Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. A. Revathi, Assistant Professor of English, Sri Sharda College for Women, Salem. Today, let's see an introduction to post-colonial literature. Post-colonial literature is the literature by people from formerly colonized countries originating from all continents except Antarctica. This literature often addresses the problems of a country, especially questions relating to the political and cultural independence of formerly subjugated people and themes such as racialism and colonialism. The term post-colonial means post or after the colonial period. It widely accepted term to indicate those literatures which emerged after the end of formal colonization. It covers all the literature from the countries which were affected by colonial culture. In simple terms, it is the antithesis of European literature. Its implication is a historical phenomenon. So, without further delay, let's get started. Before knowing about post colonialism, let's see what is meant by colonialism. Colonialism is an extension of nations' ruler over territory beyond its borders. It also refers to the establishment and maintenance of the colonies in one territory by people from another country. Colonialism is the process where the sovereignty over the colony is claimed by the colonizer. In other words, colonialism is the practice of a powerful nation seeking to extend its authority by conquering other countries or establishing settlements and controlling their population and resources. The domination can be through direct territorial acquisition or by establishing economic and political control over the colonized area. The imperialist expansion of Europe into the rest of the world during the last 400 years, in which a dominant imperium or center carried on a relationship of control and influence over its margins or colonies. This relationship tended to extend to social, pedagogical, economic, political, and broadly cultural exchanges, often with a hierarchical European settler class and local educated elite class forming layers between the European mother nation and the various indigenous people who were all controlled. Now, let's know about post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is a critical academic study of the cultural, political, and economic legacy of colonialism and imperialism. It focusing on the impact of human control and exploitation of colonized people and their lands. This field started to emerge in the 1960s as scholars from previously colonized countries began publishing on the lingering effect of colonialism, developing a critical theory analysis of the history, culture, literature, and discourse of imperial power. Broadly, a study of the effects of colonialism on cultures and societies. It is concerned with both how European nations conquered and controlled the third world culture and how these groups have since responded to and resisted those encroachments. Post colonialism as both a body of theory and a study of political and cultural change has gone and continues to go through three broad stages. So, the first one, the initial awareness of the social, psychological, and cultural inferiority enforced by being in a colonized state. Second, the struggle for ethnic, cultural, and political autonomy. So, the last one, a growing awareness of cultural overlap and hybridity. Let's know what is the difference between colonial literature and post-colonial literature. Colonial literature is often written from the perspective of the colonizer. It is often portrays indigenous people and culture savage or primitive. whereas post-colonial literature is written from the perspective of the former colonized country or colonized people. It portrays the problems and consequences of colonization and decolonization. It attempts to describe the indigenous people, places, and practices to counteract the stereotypical images portrayed by the colonizer. A small MCQ session. Which of the following works cannot be categorized under post-colonial theory? Nation and narration, Orientalism, discipline and punish, white mythologies. Yes, it's discipline and punish. Second question, the rejection of universalism is a mark of deconstruction, new historicism, structuralism, and post-colonial criticism. Yes, it's option D, post-colonial criticism. Universalism implies that it is possible to apply generalized norms, values, or concepts to all people and cultures, regardless of the context in which they are located. Now, let's see the key concepts that exist in post-colonialism. The first one is othering. Othering involves two concepts, that is, the exotic other and the demonic other. The exotic other represents a fascination with the inherent dignity and beauty of primitive or undeveloped other as delineated in the works of W.B. Yeats in the poem Byzantium, while the demonic other is represented as inferior, negative, savage, and evil, which is described in the novels like Heart of Darkness and A Passage to India. Second major key concept of post-colonial literature is diaspora. Diaspora refers to people who have been displaced or dispersed from their homelands and who possess or shares a collective memory and myth and the nostalgic reminiscence of home or an inherited ideology of home, because a personal identity as well as a collective identity of members of a particular community. They are not rooted in one location and live in the memories of their imagined homelands. Indian diasporic experience. So, Indian diasporic experience, for instance, has been extensively documented by authors like Bharati Mukherjee, Meena Alexander, Kiran Desai, Jhumpa Lahiri, and many other writers. The third concept is hybridity. The word hybridity was in use in English since the early 17th century and gained popularity during 19th century. Charles Darwin used the term in 1837 in reference to his experiments in cross fertilization in plants. It is not a new cultural or historical phenomenon. It has been feature of all civilizations since time immemorial, from the Egypts, Greeks, and Romans to the present. It is the most frequently used term in post-colonial literature. In post-colonial literature, hybridity simply refers to the mixture of Eastern and Western culture within the contact zone produced by colonization or simply cross-cultural exchange. Hybridity in post-colonial studies has been influenced by the work of political theorists like Will, who talks about multicultural citizenship in the globalized world. This leads to the emergence of new identities where the original identity, historical experiences, and memories are not abandoned but is constructively merged with a host culture to move beyond the constructed limits of both, forging solidarities against essential racial oppression. Cultural theorists such as Stuart Hall have argued for new ethnicities that deny ideas of essential black or essential white identity, proposing a real heterogeneity of interest and identity. Fourth concept is double consciousness. a major concept formulated by W.E.B. Du Bois. Double consciousness echoes Frantz Fanon's contention of the divided self in the work Black Skin, White Masks, that the black always sees himself through the eyes of the white. Du Bois described double consciousness as two souls, two thoughts in one dark body. Mina Alexander later altered this by saying, many souls, many thoughts in one dark body. Pointing to the immigrant's experience in multi subject positions, a recurrent theme occurs in the writings of Ben Okri, Amitav Ghosh, Derek Walcott, Salman Rushdie, Carly Phillips, and other writers. Mimicry. Mimicry demonstrates an ambivalent relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. The colonized subject mimics the colonizer by adopting the colonizer's cultural habits, language, attire, values, and etc. Mimicry, therefore, locates a crack in the certainty of colonial dominance and uncertainty in its control of the behavior of the colonized. It's seen as the opportunity pattern of behavior where a person copies the person who is in power in the hope to have access to a similar power. When a person copies his master, he is supposed to suppress his original and cultural identity. Homi Bhabha notes that mimicry is the process by which the colonized subject is reproduced as almost the same but not quite. It contains both mockery and a menace. It reveals the limitations in the authority of the colonial discourse almost as though the colonial authority inevitably embodies the seeds of its own destruction. Gender. Post-colonial gender discourse discusses the double colonization of women by both imperialism and patriarchy. In post-colonial literature, gender and sexuality have become prominent themes in the last decades of the 20th century. Gender and the role of women in the post colonial countries have been the focus in the writings of Anita Desai and many other post colonial writers. The linkage between gender and the racial or ethnic identity has been the subject of numerous autobiographical writings by Native Canadian and African American women like Gloria and Maria Campbell. Post-colonial gender studies examine how class, caste, economy, political empowerment, and literacy have contributed to the condition of women in the third world countries. Now, let's see post-colonial criticism. The post-colonial criticism reflects on the following points. It is a study and analysis of politics and cultural resistance mentioned in the colonialism history. The ideas of social justice, democracy, and emancipation against the oppressive rule, discrimination, and racism emerge from such criticism. The contrasting differences between the natives and the colonial population reflect in the colonial literature. Edward Syed, Homi K. Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak. All these three writers are considered as the pillars of post-colonial criticism. Now, let's see about Edward Syed. Edward Syed is a Palestinian American literary critic and political activist. He worked as a professor of literature at Columbian University and founder of post-colonial studies. As a cultural critic, Syed is best known for his book Orientalism, which was written in the year 1978. In the 19th century, a trend for Orient appeared. The artists were inspired by its luxury, mystery, and the supernatural that surrounded the part of the world. But this new craze for Orientalism was also the reflection of several historical events, such as the Egyptian campaign, which took place between 1798 and 1799, the Greek War for Independence, which happened from 1821 to 1829, and the third, the conquest of the Suez Canal in the year 1869, are the notable things. Orientalism refers to the word Orient plus Occident. Orient means the East, Occident means the West. The root word of Orientalism is the East part, and that is eastern part of the world, the East, the rising sun, daybreak, and dawn. The first Orientalist. The first Orientalists were 19th century scholars who translated the writings of the Orient into English based on the idea that an effective colonial downfall requires knowledge of the dominated people. This is the idea of knowledge as a power set by Syed. Syed thinks that by knowing the Orient, the West came to own it. That is the image of the Orient as passive while the West was active. So, according to Edward Said, it is imperialism which motivated Orientalism. Orientalism. The first person to use the term Orientalism was Edward Said. He stated that Western authors depicted ancient Asian countries as being less than themselves. These attitudes were driven by the Western imperialist tendencies of European countries in 18th century and the 19th century. Orientalism is a particular way of looking at Asian countries adapted by Western authors and creators. It depicts Asian societies and cultures as exotic and mystical places. Asian individuals and groups are depicted in patronizing way, and it is heavily implied by Orientalist authors and artists that ancient Asian societies needed Western help to modernize their communities. One can witness Orientalism in arts. In 1704, the first French translation of Arabian Nights was written by Anthony Galland. It is the first example for Orientalist based work in literature. Whereas the poem, which was written by St. Coleridge in the year 1861, that is Kubla Khan, is also an example for Orientalism. In a nutshell, Orientalism is the tendency of creators to show Asian cultures from Western perspectives. Whereas in music, the popular song which was sung by Coldplay and Rihanna, so the name of the song, Princess of China, is an example of Orientalism. The second person that we are going to see now is Homi K. Baba. He is known for the introduction of theoretical key concepts such as hybridity, mimicry, difference, ambivalence, and the third space. So these are all the concepts which are proposed by Homi K. Baba. He is one of the most influential cultural theorists and a key thinker of contemporary post-colonial studies. He is an Indian scholar and critical theorist. He also received Padma Bhushan Award in the field of literature and education from the Indian government. He is the author of numerous works exploring colonial and post-colonial theory, cultural change, power and cosmopolitanism. Nation and Narration, The Location of Culture are the notable works written by Homi K. Baba. Gayatri Spivak. Gayatri Spivak is an Indian scholar, theorist, and feminist critic. She contends that the destruction caused by colonial power fundamentally alters the history of a country. The language of academia in post colonial societies then reinforces the hegemonic power of Western cultures over those in the developing world even after empires disappear. Spivak is best known for her essay Can the Subaltern Speak? One of her most important and appreciable work of translation is Jacques Derrida's Of Grammatology. Now, let's see one of the finest work written by Gayatri Spivak, that is, Can the Subaltern Speaks. It was first published in the journal called Wedge in the year 1985. She speaks about the harm done to the poor, women, and non-Europeans by the privileged West. In post-colonial designates the colonized mass who are socially, politically, and geographically excluded from the hierarchy of power. For Spivak, the subalterns are those who belongs to the third world country. She emphasizes the voice of subaltern women. She emphasizes that the subaltern women cannot speak as their voice was completely silenced under the political, social, and cultural hegemony of Hindu patriarchal codes of moral conduct and their representation as victims of a barbaric culture in British colonial narratives. On the whole, she says that the subaltern cannot speak. Here comes the quiz session. Who among the following developed the term strategic essentialism? Edward Syed, Gayatri Spivak, Homike Baba, Ajaz Ahmed. I hope you get the right answer. So the answer is Gayatri Spivak, who is the author of the book The Black Skin, White Mask. Edward Syed, Franz Fanon, Richard Wright, and Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, it's Franz Fanon. Let's see few post-colonial poets. Arun Kolatkar, A.K. Ramanujan, Kofi Avanur, Leopold Sneger, Grace Nicholas, James Rainey, and George Bovering. So these are all the few post-colonial poets. And the works written by these poets are The Priest, Yeshwant Rao, and Old Women. All these three poems are written by Arun Kolatkar. A.K. Ramanujan had written the poem called Returning Death of Poem. The Weaver Bird was written by Kofi Aunur. In Memoriam is a poem written by Leopold, whereas Grace Nicholas had written a fantastic poem called In My Name. Maps is a poem that talks about the paths to schooling, was written by James Rainey. So last, George Bovering had written a fantastic poem about his own grandfather called Grandfather. Lion and the Jewel and King's Horseman are written by Old Soinka. Douglas Stewart's Ned Kelly, Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man, Kate Smith, Chinua Achbe's Dead Man's Path, Things Fall Apart, and Arrow of God are the notable writers of post-colonial literature. Post-colonialism signals a possible future of overcoming colonialism. Post-colonial literature not only helped to consolidate national identity in anti-colonial struggles, but also critique the European colonial of nationalism. I hope this video helped you to get a brief knowledge about post-colonial literature. Thank you.